everyone. Today's conversation is with Alex Morgan. She's a writer. She wrote the book Mother Tongue, and it's about her autism and her life story, a difficult relationship with her parents, particularly her mother. She also has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and mast cell activation syndrome, and has struggled a lot with these. They're often related to people who are neurodivergent, as it's a collagen disorder. And yeah, she shares her experiences of that living in the Scottish Highlands and how walking and trekking the mountains has become quite a challenge for her. So anybody who struggles with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that is related to their autism, this is a very useful conversation that we had. I hope you enjoy it. Alex Morgan, hello. Welcome to A Neurodivergent Soul. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
You're a writer.
It is lovely to be here.
You're a writer.
I
You've
am.
written your story.
I have. I spent nearly 40 years as a journalist writing other people's stories. And a big part of that was keeping yourself out of the narrative. It was always about others. So this is quite strange for me now to be putting myself out there and telling really personal, quite painful things about myself and my life. But it feels like it's important to do it right now, I think.
That's so interesting. And you're recently diagnosed with neurodivergence. Tell us what brought that on.
Well, yes, that was a complete accident. For women of my sort of age, it's often to do with finding that your children or grandchildren have been diagnosed and starting to look at yourself and see similarities. Or quite often, perhaps if you're slightly younger than me, it's to do with perimenopause or menopause and the symptoms of those things sort of exacerbating your autistic difficulties or whatever, difficulties relating to whatever form of neurodivergence you have.
Yeah.
But my story was actually quite different. I had never really considered that I could be autistic. I knew I was dyspraxic because I've always felt very clumsy and uncoordinated, but I hadn't looked beyond that. However, I ended up in the summer of 2022 in bed with COVID, and I was recovering and I was bored, not feeling bright enough to read a book or watch something online, but I was looking for just something to sort of occupy me slightly. And I came across a website that had a whole range of neurodivergence tests on it. And I thought, oh, okay. A couple of my friends have just been diagnosed with ADHD, as many people were diagnosed with things during lockdown, because again, that sort of brought their difficulties to the fore.
Oh.
And I thought, my husband and I have talked about this, and we're quite convinced that he probably has ADHD. So we thought, well, he could follow it up, but he, at that point, decided not to, although he has since been diagnosed. But I looked at these tests and I thought, right, I'll just do the ADHD one for fun because I knew I didn't have ADHD. So I did the test, and as I expected, the results said, no, you don't have ADHD. But the small print said if you have one form of neurodivergence, as I say, in my case, dyspraxia, it's worth doing the whole set of tests because you may find that one of the other forms does apply to you too. So I went on to do the autism test, and I didn't realize at the time that it was actually the AQ50, which is considered to be the sort of the gold standard diagnostic test in the UK. So I did this, but I was very careful with my answers because I thought, I'm not autistic, and so I'm just doing this for a bit of interest, but I don't want to get a false positive. So I answered very thoughtfully, scrolled down to the end after doing my 50th click of the button, and it gave me a score of 30 out of 50. I thought, ooh, because it said at the bottom that if you have more than 26, there's a very high chance you're autistic. And if you score more than 32, you are pretty well certainly autistic. And what was really strange was that sitting there, I'm certainly feeling a bit stunned looking at the
Mm.
score. I didn't doubt it. I immediately knew that it must be right because I had answered truthfully. The question seemed sensible. And I just thought, oh my God, I had had this idea of autism that was clearly wrong because I thought it didn't apply to me. Um, and yeah, I was absolutely sure that the issue was me and a problem of my understanding, and it was not the test. And I called downstairs. I did sit for quite a long time in the bed with the laptop, kind of going, ooh. But I eventually called downstairs to my husband, and he came up, and I said, I've just taken this test online, and it says I'm autistic. And he kind of just looked at me and went, how do you feel? And I said, well, it's a bit of a shock, but it makes an awful lot of sense of a lifetime of difficulties. And he
Mm.
said, well, yes, you were different. I just didn't know why.
Bless her.
So, and then the next day, I retook the test with him watching over me to see that I hadn't got the answers wrong, and my
Yeah.
score actually went up. So
Wow.
there we are.
And did you take it any further? Did you get a sort of NHS or
Yes,
anything like
yes.
that? Yeah.
Mm. I am very much the sort of person who likes to tick the boxes, do everything correctly, which obviously now I see this as a sort of a facet of my autism that I have very
Yeah.
rigid, black and white, clear ways of doing things. So it's like, yes, the next step is to get an official diagnosis. And
Yes.
I absolutely understand now that for lots of people, that's not necessary. And
Mm.
it really
Mm.
isn't needed. People
Mm.
self-diagnose, they're not going to get it wrong. We are the experts.
Yeah.
And if someone wants to self-diagnose and not take it further, that's absolutely fine for them. But for me, I wanted that sort of tick of officialdom to sort of say,
Mm.
no, you've not imagined this, you've not made it up.
Mm.
So I heard about right to choose, followed that path. Now that's something that's increasingly difficult to get now, but it should be that your local NHS organises or helps you organise a private
Mm.
diagnosis free and speedily. But I know that a lot of people aren't getting access to that now, which is awful. But I was lucky. I got it really quickly. Within a couple of months, I got my formal diagnosis. And yeah, it just made a heck of a lot of sense.
And what does it feel like now that you're coming to terms with it and you've written a book about your journey and spent more time with it? What are you noticing in yourself?
Yeah, I'm noticing that I'm a heck of a lot happier. That's the really crucial thing.
Yeah.
I think for me, having had nearly 60 years of really a very difficult time relating to other people, social things, sensory things. It was really, really hard because I thought I was at fault. I thought I was just a useless human being. So to
Mm.
find out there was actually nothing wrong, really, I'm not broken, I'm not at fault, I'm just different.
Yeah.
It made me feel so much better about myself. I
Mm.
understood myself and felt I could then look at everything through this lens and say, well, now I know why this happens or why that happens, why
Yeah.
this is difficult. And
Mm.
it enabled me to start making really helpful decisions for myself, thinking things like, well, actually, I don't have to go to the pub with friends when I know I find it far too noisy, far too many people. I
Mm.
don't like the smells. I don't like that sort of feeling of people getting drunk around me.
Mm.
I struggle to hear people because my brain isn't able to tease out this is the conversation I want to tune into from all the background noise. It's all just too much.
Yeah.
So now I feel I can quite legitimately say, no, that doesn't suit me. I'll not go to that.
Yeah.
Whereas before, as a people pleaser who thought I was just making a fuss about nothing, I would say, oh, you've
Mm.
got to, don't be silly. It's nonsense. You're fine. Go. And I'd have a miserable time.
Yeah.
So I'm not doing that to myself anymore.
Yeah. No, that's really good, isn't it? Yeah, and to give yourself permission for that. So, do you
Yes.
what do you think about this discovery? Because I'm similar to you. I very late diagnosed, mid 60s. So, that's been my path. But what do you think of the lateness of it? Is there any benefits, or do you wish that you had known much earlier on?
This is something I've struggled with a bit because it's very difficult. When I was younger, nobody was really aware of autism as something that affected women just as much as men.
Mm,
Um, it was thought there was vanishingly few of us, if any at all, and there was a very set idea of how we would present, and if we didn't present in that what is seen as stereotypically male way, which isn't even really the way that all autistic males present, but anyway, that sort
mm,
of monosyllabic, no eye contact, train spotter type myth thing.
mm,
People didn't recognize that that wasn't really the heart of autism at all. Um, so the chances of me being recognized younger were very slim.
yeah,
But yes, I can't help but think, gosh, if someone had known, had spotted there was something different and sort of we'd sat down and be able to talk about it and work it out, it could have made my life an awful lot less painful.
mm, mm,
I suppose, though, there is that argument that if I had known, would I have pushed myself to do the things that I did and to achieve the things that I did in terms of a career and a lot of difficult stuff? And I am uncertain about that. And although I wouldn't want to relive a minute of it because the vast majority of my life up until diagnosis was
mm,
horrible and really hard work and
mm,
lonely and frightening and all just
mm,
dreadful. Um, it did get me to where I sort of am now.
mm,
Um, and if I hadn't been in those high pressure jobs, I wouldn't have met my husband and I wouldn't have done certain things. So my life would have been very different. So I think what I'm trying to say is I'm sort of okay with the way it's turned out, but I
mm,
would wish for others that they get the diagnosis, get recognized as soon as they want to be, as soon as is right for them, because I
mm.
don't want anyone else to suffer in the
Yeah,
way that I suffered for such a long period, I suppose.
yeah. And in many places, there's so much more accommodation anyway these days, isn't there? Whereas when we were little girls, there was nothing. There's nothing there at all.
Yeah,
Did
exactly.
did
Exactly.
anybody in your
So
life?
young, yes, young women now. Yeah.
Right, yes, exactly.
Sorry.
So no, but was there anybody in your life who may have noticed something different about you at all, do you think? Or was everybody in their own different bubbles and wouldn't have been able to notice much anyway?
Yes, I think that's exactly it. I think my mother, for instance, found the world a very frightening
Yeah.
place. I know that from the way she brought me up and passed that on to me that the world is dangerous, it's full of monsters, you have to be very careful, you have to make yourself very small and unobtrusive to keep yourself safe. Um, Now, partly that's maybe a generational thing that a lot of women have felt that historically with very good reason that being a woman has not
Mm.
been a very comfortable or safe thing if you wanted to do anything other than be very small and quiet and compliant. So there is that. But yeah, I think her fear informed a lot of my upbringing. So I'm not sure that she really saw me as separate from herself. I think she was having too much of a struggle to really be aware that yeah, was a separate entity with my own struggles.
Right. Yeah.
My father was completely oblivious to anything but himself. It was quite a dysfunctional family. I've written about this at
Yes.
length in my book, that it was quite a strange family I was part of. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, really, there was nobody who had the time, the energy, the awareness, the desire to see me as someone who might need support. I was very much left to sort of battle through on my own,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I treated as normal. But
Of
looking
course.
back, I think, ooh, that was tough.
That's
Yeah,
all we know, isn't it? To
yeah,
normalize things. Yeah,
yeah,
there's that. It sounded to me, because I read a bit of your book, haven't read it all yet, but I do intend to. I'm not a great reader, but I'm very curious about it. It sounded to me like your mother was wanting to draw you into a lot of her own fears. So
yeah,
talking about your father burning the house down with his cigarettes and from the bedroom or that sort of thing. It's like, why would you tell a little child that that was likely to happen? So she was bringing you into the fear place with her, wasn't she? So
Yes,
it's almost
yes.
as if that she needed that companion in that dark, gloomy place, and you were kind of, yeah, quite victim to that in a way, that you had no say around those sorts of things, and you must have been quite young then.
Yes, I mean, I think that was true from when I was really very small, that I was put in the position physically and psychologically of almost being my mother's protector. And
Right.
again, that was my normal. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s and having a truly difficult time personally and at work, and I went into therapy. And the therapist said, "You do realize that was psychological abuse, what you went through as a child. That particularly that my mother used me, yes, as psychologically as a support by sharing her deepest fears and sort of putting them onto me, but
Yeah.
also that I was used as a sort of a human shield to keep my father away from her
Right.
because we slept in the same bed." And it was only when I was writing the book, I thought, isn't it interesting that she slept on the side with the window and I slept by the door. And so it was as if I was being put there in a bed with my mother at an age when I was perfectly capable of having my own bed in a house where there was another empty room that I could have been sleeping in. I
Right.
think I was put there as a human shield to keep my father from his venturing out of his separate bedroom and into hers.
Ah,
And it really, it kind of creeps me out now just thinking about it.
yeah.
And I think it was inappropriate, but I also think, my God, what was the depth of her fear?
Mm,
Not just about the world, but about the person she lived with, the man that was supposed to be her safe person, safe place, that she was so afraid of him and
mm,
disliked him so much that she had to use her small child to keep him away.
ah,
It really says a lot, and it says a lot about the atmosphere I was growing up in, I think.
yeah, it's quite shocking, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if at any point, maybe going to school or being with friends, what kind of little girl were you separate to your mother? Can you recall any of that?
Well, yeah, it's very interesting. There's two very distinct pictures of me. There's what I remember and what others remember of me,
Mm,
which basically tells you I was masking from a very young age because I remember the world as this black and white, scary place. And I mean visually black and white. My memories for a long time were all just in sort of monochrome. When I look back, it was frightening. Other people were frightening. Everything was baffling. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't understand how to play games. I wanted to be left on my own to read or craft or just not have to interact because it was
mm,
exhausting. I was always
mm,
being ill. I always had tummy upsets. I always had headaches. It all makes complete sense now. But at the time, I didn't know why I always felt this way. But if you ask someone who knew me at the time, they will give you a completely different version.
mm,
I have a cousin who I'm very close to who was very helpful for me in writing the book, filling in some gaps in my memories.
yeah,
And she's 15 years older than me. So she was really at an age when she was noticing and remembering, and she spent quite a lot of time in our household because of her own family situation. And she has no doubt of who I was then. I was chatty, I was friendly, I was cheerful, I was always smiling. There was nothing about my demeanor that raised any red flags for her of something sort of slightly untoward or out of place. So it just makes me look back and think, oh my God, no wonder I was so exhausted because of the energy I must have been putting into keeping up this bright, cheerful exterior because I knew from my mother that's what was expected of you in this frightening world, to
right.
keep you safe and also to ensure that my mother still cared about me. I knew I mustn't do anything to upset her because I relied on her, so I mustn't be
Yeah.
difficult. Um, and I knew that she believed that emotions were a very bad, very dangerous, very rude thing.
Ah,
That was what I was taught from an early age. Never show emotion. only rude, vulgar, common people show emotion. So you must never be angry. You must never be upset. You mustn't even be happy because anything like that imposes on the other people around you. And that's just the height of rudeness. I know I'm looking at your face and you can see you're kind of thinking, oh my goodness, it is bonkers, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
But as
truly.
an adult looking back and recognizing all sorts of aspects of my mother's upbringing and her fear and her sort of
Mm.
unstable sense of self that came from her parents for various reasons,
Yeah.
it makes complete sense. But oh my gosh, how to drain any potential joy out of the world and how to frighten
Mm.
a small child. It's
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
lesson in how to do it really effectively.
yeah, amazing. So,
Shocking.
so what did you do for you? What did you love? What was your coping mechanism or your strategy or
Mm.
solution?
It was as far as possible keeping away from others. And that was
Yeah,
difficult because I had to go to school, which I didn't
yeah,
want to do. I was made to go out and play with other children because my mother, in tandem with this idea that the world was very frightening, she also had this very firm belief that you must socialize appropriately, and learn how to do this. And that if you didn't, again, you'd potentially be in
mm,
trouble with others. So I was constantly being pushed out to play with other children. Um, and I didn't want to. I wanted to be at
mm,
home with a book because me and a book was safe and
yeah,
interesting. It was another world to get lost in that was in, no matter what the world was, it was better than the one I lived in.
mm,
Um, and also crafting things, making what I recognize now was trying to make little perfect worlds that I could control because my world was imperfect and out of my control and felt
right,
dangerous, therefore.
yeah,
So I used to spend an awful lot of time making cut-out paper dolls with lovely little outfits,
mm,
making peg dolls and dressing them, making little plasticine houses and with their furniture, making little tiny replicas of all sort of household things,
wow,
furniture at tiny sizes, and making it absolutely as beautiful as I could. And yeah, looking back, you
mm,
don't need to be a professional psychologist to go, yeah, that's about
mm,
perfection,
mm,
control, the
mm.
opposite of the world you feel you're living in.
Right,
So
creating
it
that.
says a lot about where my head was, I think.
Yeah, creating that perfect little world. Yeah,
Mm.
that's very interesting. So you went from loving books and yeah, that little make believe world, um, to journalism. What
Mhm.
was going on in between all of that? What happened at school? What happened to your
Uh,
education? How did you get there?
School was painful. Actually, apparently, I really struggled to learn to read and write, which again makes sense of my autistic dyspraxic brain. I was looking at things going, well, everyone seems to know that's a B and that's a D, but I don't know how they know the difference.
Mm,
Um, just the absolute basics of recognizing what was on a page just baffled
mm,
me.
mm,
Fortunately, though, my first primary school teacher did notice this, that I seemed bright but seemed to be struggling. Um, and my mother actually had been a teacher before she married. So between them, they did kind of manage to teach me to read and write. But apparently, it was quite a long and painful process. But weirdly, on top of all this, even so, my primary one teacher did tell my mother that she thought I would grow up to be a writer. And that really doesn't make sense given my
wow.
difficulties.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what it was that this teacher saw, whether it was the fact that I was so talkative and seemed to be able to, put the words together well if I was speaking, and it was only on paper that I had difficulties. I
Mm,
don't know. But my mother told me this, that, Mrs. Brown says you're going to be a writer. And at
mm,
some level, that really struck a chord. And I think I knew from very early on it was what I wanted. Um, but it was very hard to see how I'd get there because
mm,
although I did well at school, it was exhausting for me academically. And I now recognize it's because my
mm.
brain just isn't wired to learn in the way we're expected to learn.
Yeah.
And taking exams, for instance, was a nightmare for me because I think like a lot of autistic people, I mean, I know we're all very different, but there are certain things that we do share. And I think it's fairly common that we find an exam-based traditional educational system
Mm,
tricky because you're expected to, you get this open-ended sort of essay question. You're expected to think of the answers, marshal all this information in your brain, structure it, and then
mm,
actually physically write it, all with a time limit that's very short. And together, those things are just, oh, makes your head explode.
mm,
Um, and with the added issue of dyspraxia making writing quite a difficult process for me,
mm.
I never quite did myself justice at school. And like many autistic kids, I was bullied because
Okay.
other kids, they can smell your difference. I'm sure they couldn't say what it was, but they know there's something about you. So it was a very tough, exhausting time, interspersed with as many kind of faked up illnesses as I could manage to get me off school.
Yeah.
Every little thing I blew up into something major, and if I could manage to stretch it to a fortnight, I was thrilled. I get like a holiday in bed. Um, so by the time I got to the end of school, and I went off to university to study history because it was a subject I was kind of good at. I thought that's interesting. I like learning about people. So I
Yeah.
went off to do that. But
Mm,
I was really frightened about the big world beyond that because I just thought I can't imagine how I can exist in it, how I can earn a living. And so in the end, in a sort of a panic, I thought, well, journalism, that's writing, it's what I like, it's
mm,
words, I'm good at that.
mm,
Um, and I just grabbed it and ran with that. And I
mm.
suspect it is about the only way I could have made a living. I'm not good at anything else, really. I don't know
That's a
what else I
great
would have
job.
done.
It's a great job to have. I mean, journalism, that's interesting, gets you amongst people and doing something that you love, writing. So,
Yeah.
did you start to see the
Yes.
world as less scary when you moved away from your mother? Or do you think that stayed with you?
No.
You didn't? No.
Yeah, sadly, it was too deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
In my late 20s, I recognized that actually my relationship with my mother wasn't healthy and that her negativity, which I couldn't fix, wasn't doing me any good. And so I did pull away.
Mm,
But the rest of the world, unfortunately, that fear was so deeply ingrained that I'd absorbed from her, but also that was reinforced by my own experience of the world.
mm,
Um, it just felt like a horrifying place. The world was too noisy, too bright, too busy. People seemed to me very hard to understand, particularly in the world of journalism. It is very high pressure.
yeah.
Back in the 80s and 90s, also very misogynistic. Um, I felt constantly under attack and very vulnerable. I ended up getting into quite senior positions where I'd be just about the only senior woman. And, you know, I have memories of going into weekly editorial meetings on a newspaper with these senior male executives sitting there. And you think, well, these should be fairly evolved, sensible adult human beings. And they'd be saying things like you'd walk through the door and they'd be going, oh, here comes the token female, get him off, and things like that. And nobody was, what are you doing? This is horrible.
Awful, awful.
So as a woman and as someone autistic, it's like a double whammy of, oh my God. And yet, in those days, you just accepted. And I had no power to stand up and say, this is unacceptable. You don't treat people like this. I couldn't. I was afraid and I had to just put up with it. And oh, God, it was grim. So, yes, journalism in one way, great, because yes, people,
Mm,
stories, words, fascinating, a way
yeah,
to be out in the world with a slight distance. But at the same time, in terms of the human interaction with colleagues and the
yeah,
stress and the lack of support,
yeah,
grim, really.
yeah. Sounds awful. Sounds really dreadful, that kind of
Mm.
situation. So how did you
Yeah.
manage? How did you, I mean, did you take your work home? Did you um, what was your solution for that?
Well, in the end, really, I didn't manage. I kind of got into my late 20s and I think I was in a constant state of burnout, really. I recognize that
Yeah,
now,
yeah,
looking back at my diaries. Um, because there's that part of your brain that always wants to minimize things to make yourself feel better. And so before I reread my diaries for writing the book, I was thinking, oh, just surely I'm making a big fuss about nothing. I look back and it feels like a horrendous period of my life. But actually, when I then went and sat down and read the diaries, I thought, oh my God, it really
Mm,
was. The
mm,
diaries are just full of me saying, I'm tearful, I'm upset, I'm not well. There was just endless stream of I burst into tears again and I didn't know why. I felt
mm,
depressed, I didn't know why. I felt sick, I had headaches. This it's just and constantly writing little notes about, oh, worried about a row with so and so and falling out with this my boss and I'm frightened about this. And
mm.
it was just even worse than I'd remembered. I think I'd almost squashed down a lot of how awful it was because I couldn't afford to remember.
Yeah.
And eventually it got to the point when walked into the office one day, sat down, started my day, and I thought, I can't do this anymore. I remember I was like shaking so much I could hardly pick up a cup of coffee. And I
Uh,
just thought, I can't do this. And I went to my secretary, who was also a friend, and said, look, I need to get out of the office. Let's go to a matinee at the cinema, which was completely mad. But I think she recognized immediately I was just in a terrible state. And off we went. And we went and sat and watched Terminator. And I mean, bunked off work. And I thought, well, I'll pull myself together and go back tomorrow. But I
uh,
realized I couldn't.
right,
So I
right.
went to my partner's house and put on my pajamas and got into bed. And I stayed there for 6 months.
Wow.
And
Oh, wow.
in the end, had to give up my job. And it was just awful, really.
So
But that was, yeah,
did you
burnout.
carry on with?
I couldn't do it any longer.
No, it sounds like you did the right thing for yourself and with that burnout that you talk about. Yeah, so did you go back into journalism or did you find anything else that was going to work for you? Something different, different environment.
I did go back to, I did go back, I did go back to work. I didn't go back to work because I had recovered. I had to go back to work because I'd run out of money. And
Yeah.
my partner at that time, not my husband, now somebody different, said, I can't support you financially. I'm not prepared to do that. So I was forced to go back to work, but I recognized I had to go freelance. I couldn't be in an office again in that environment.
Yeah.
So I sort of built up a career as a freelance, which was fine and had given me a lot more freedom. It was a lot better for
Mm,
me, but it was always financially precarious. So I did eventually go back into staff jobs and had to put myself back in that really stressful
mm,
position.
mm,
And I think at some level through those years, yeah, it was just still a state of low level burnout that I was just
mm.
wading through because I had no option.
Right,
And
right.
because I didn't recognize what the issues were, that it wasn't me, it was just me not being in a world that wasn't suited to me and it wasn't my fault or anything. I wasn't in a position to stop and try and
Yeah.
think of how I could improve things for myself. And no one was there to say, look, yeah, you're autistic. Let's stop and look at how
Mm,
we could improve things. So I just forced myself on, but it was
right. So
hard.
yeah, I get that. I mean, there's so many of us who do take on the freelance lifestyle and have to forego financial security. It's a very common thing, but yes, it sounds like you pushed yourself into that working environment continuously to make ends meet and yeah, struggled because of it, suffered because of it. Um,
Yeah.
when did you finally let it go, or are you still working? Are you what's happening now?
I did escape eventually.
Yeah,
We were living in central Scotland, and my husband and I are commuting to Edinburgh and Glasgow, and working in quite, high pressure roles. And luckily, we kind of had an attack of common sense and realized that it wasn't quite the right life for either of us. And obviously, now that we know my husband's neurodivergent, that makes
right.
sense.
Yeah,
So we moved to the Lake District. We sold our house, we gave up our jobs, moved to the Lake District, and thought, right, we'll make a fresh start in a environment that's much less urban. We're able to be much more in nature here, and we just took different types of jobs. We accepted that
Mm.
we weren't going to be able to make a great deal of money compared to what we'd made with city-based careers, but that actually it would be healthier for us.
Yeah.
So I started working for a conservation charity part-time and just keeping the freelance journalism as a kind of the two things running parallel.
Yeah.
So it was, for me, a good compromise of knowing there's a bit of money coming in, having a bit of freedom. And that actually was much better.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And interestingly, now looking back, working for that charity, I realized how many of the people I worked with were neurodivergent too.
Okay.
It was like a bit of a refuge for autistic people.
Nice.
That was very nice. And the colleagues that I had then, a lot of them are close friends now.
Yeah.
As a result of COVID, a lot of charities struggled. So there was a redundancy program. And I thought, well, I'm being paid to go away. Actually, they were offering enough money and there was the option to access my pension early. If I left, I could just about survive if I did a few other things on the side. So, in that sense, although COVID was in many ways a terrible thing for other people, for me, actually, there were a couple of good things that came out of it in that I got my diagnosis and I got redundancy.
Yeah.
Um, so since then, I have been able to live. We live very, very carefully on very small pensions, with a little bit of other income coming in, but
Mm.
it's a much healthier, much happier life.
Yeah.
Um,
Imagine.
we're
Yeah.
in control now, which is, and we're well aware of how privileged we are that that's not an option for so
Yeah.
many
No,
people.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
many autistic people have to stay in the workplace in, environments that just don't
Mm.
suit them. And
Mm.
it's really, really hard for them. So we're
Yeah.
well aware of how lucky we are.
And what's needed is more accommodations for people in the workplace, which there are organisations and individuals working towards that.
Yes.
But it's going to take some time, I reckon, before there's a real understanding of it. Eh?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly. It's a long process.
yeah, yeah, it does seem that way. But besides the work, tell us more about living in Scotland and the joys of that. And it's such a beautiful place, hey?
Yes.
Such a
Um,
wild, wonderful existence for
exactly.
many.
Being Scottish is very important to me, even though
Nice.
I do live just south of the border now. That Scottish identity matters such a lot. And growing up as a child, we lived most of the time by the seaside, and we were in Edinburgh initially, but then we always went for holidays to the seaside. But then, when I was a little bit older, about 10 years old, we moved to live by the sea. And for me, living on the coast was just
Mm,
joyful. And still now, for me, water, whether it's a lake or the sea,
mm,
represents something very joyful. It's about openness and possibility and freedom and big
mm,
horizons. And
mm.
there's so many things about Scotland that are like that, being in the mountains and having those big views and not too many people.
Yeah.
It's just lovely. And I have really, over the years, enjoyed going back there and being up in the mountains. It's increasingly difficult for me to do that kind of thing now because I've always had physical difficulties as well. And the autism and dyspraxia diagnosis explained that. And I was left with sort of questions about there's
Mm,
something else. And more recently, I have found the answer to that. I've been diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and mast cell activation syndrome,
mm,
which makes sense of that. With my autism, I'm very happy to be autistic. Now I understand. I think it's great. It's me and
mm.
I love it. And I have so many autistic friends and I love them. I love the way our minds work.
Yeah.
But the Ehlers-Danlos and the MCAS, I could really do without. Because
Mm,
before I was diagnosed, I used to push myself to go up in the fells with my husband or to go up in the Scottish mountains, and we'd walk for sometimes 2 weeks at a time with our
mm,
backpacks on and all our tent and all our stuff with us. And it was wonderful in one way, but physically, it was
mm.
exhausting, heck of a toll on me. And I
Right.
didn't understand why. I'm very fit, I've always been very active, why I found those physical things so hard. And
Mm,
of course, now that I've got my diagnosis and I understand that I have basically this collagen disorder, which is what
yeah.
Ehlers-Danlos is,
Yeah.
that means that your body is very vulnerable. You're in a lot of pain, you're in a lot of tiredness all the time because your body's having to work much harder. The reckoning
Mm,
is your muscles have to work twice as hard as an unaffected person to do the same things.
mm, mm.
So sadly for me, I've had to recognize that being up in the Scottish mountains isn't really a possibility anymore. And that's quite sad. And I'm having a
Yes.
bit of difficulty coming to terms with that.
Yeah.
But it's still in my head, all those beautiful natural things and the things
Yeah.
I've seen and the places I've been. I'm carrying them
Mm.
there in my head at least, and that's lovely.
We've had Dr. Jessica Eccles on this podcast, who's a
Mm,
specialist with ELS and hypermobility with ADHD and
mm,
autism. Yeah, it's such a
yes.
fascinating subject, and I've yeah that I've gone down that path myself, starting to understand that because I'm hypermobile and um, yeah, trying to understand the difficulties with that muscular experience. Tell us more about how it affects you on a daily basis, and what is it more? Tell us more about what it is for you.
Yes, I'd been completely unaware of this link between autism, ADHD, and Ehlers-Danlos. But having read about it, it's remarkable that the two things do seem to come together disproportionately. So there is obviously there's something going on in our makeup.
Mm,
Um, and for me, that has explained so much about my difficulties.
mm,
Um, and I think it, there's a huge amount of very high number of women who are undiagnosed autistics who are struggling to work out what their difficulties are to do with. And I
mm,
think the same is true of Ehlers-Danlos. There was an Edinburgh University study that came out, and I can't remember exactly, but I think it's something like the average time for people to end up getting an Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis is 20, 25 years, something like that. So there's a shocking lack of awareness out there, and certainly among the
mm,
medical profession. Um, and I think an awful lot of autistic people are struggling physically and may feel they're hypermobile. They have a lot of pain, exhaustion, physical difficulties.
mm,
And it may well be that for them too, it's Ehlers-Danlos. Um, for me, it does mean that I am very tired a lot of the time. I have to really ration my effort, and that has got worse as I've got older. It feels as if there's a cumulative burden of decades of tiredness that I'm carrying now.
mm,
Luckily, now that I recognize that, I'm able to be more compassionate to myself and rest a little
mm,
more.
mm.
Because I used to think I was just being lazy and physically useless, and I'd push myself on.
Yeah.
And I recognize now that that really is not a healthy way to be.
Mm,
Um, so for me, it's made me, once I got the diagnosis, it's made me stop and think again about how I can be more compassionate. And I
yeah.
recognized that I've been a rower for decades, and I find that very repetitive motion of rowing incredibly soothing for my brain.
Mm,
But I recognized that competitive rowing was not a healthy thing for me, for my brain, for my body. So I stopped competing. I'd done decades of Pilates, which a lot of people say is very good for people with Ehlers-Danlos.
yeah.
But actually, I'd always struggled and found it almost too much physically. And
Mm,
so I was able to say, okay, that's not working. I'll stop that. I took up yoga instead. And
mm,
it's a very contemplative, meditative, somatic version of yoga I do.
mm.
And that has been transformative. That has
Oh,
been
nice.
so lovely for my
Mm,
body and my brain. It's helped me let go of a lot of tension built up over the years.
mm,
Um, I swim much more now because, again, I find that for my body, my joints, that works well. But I've
mm,
stopped trying to force myself to learn to do the crawl because I realize that my coordination isn't there for that. And it doesn't, that movement with the arms, particularly, is not good for my arms and my shoulders.
right.
Whereas I recognize now that breaststroke works very well. Um, so that knowledge has enabled me just to look at a lot of physical things. I don't run anymore. I used to run 10Ks and I used
Mm,
to think, gosh, everyone else looks so effortless. I'm fit. Why am I not getting the joy from running that other people seem to
mm,
get?
mm.
I just felt every step was like, oh, jarring and painful. But again, I pushed on. But now that I know, I've kind of gone, okay, no more running, gentle walking.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so having that diagnosis and that understanding has getting to know my body better as well as my brain has
Yeah.
been so helpful.
Tell our listeners more about Ehlers-Danlos as you know it. What is it?
It's like autism, it's a genetic thing. It is a collagen disorder. So it means that the collagen that should help your skin to be robust and to heal well and not bruise, that should help with your tendons, your ligaments, your joints in place, none of that is quite correctly formulated. It's all a bit too stretchy. And it
Mm,
means that you will cut and scar very easily. I don't heal well. I bruise constantly. My
mm,
skin is constantly prone to little infections. Whenever I'm tired, it shows itself in outbreaks of infections, itchy ears, itchy feet, and
mm,
things like that. It means that my gums and my teeth are affected. My gums are very fragile, very vulnerable. It means that my joints are very likely to get injured if I'm not careful. Things come out of
mm.
place very easily.
Yeah.
I had a run for a few years of my jaw hyperluxing, which means it sort of comes out but then sticks and goes back of its own accord.
Mm.
That was frightening because, of
God.
course, then I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
With other people with Ehlers-Danlos, it can be different joints. You can just turn over in the wrong way in bed and find your shoulders come out or something. I'm lucky, I don't tend to get that, but I do very prone to sciatica, things because things are loose and shifting and getting trapped.
Mm,
If I do injure a joint, it can take months to recover, if not years, where
mm.
someone else might be fine in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Um, it just means that we're incredibly fragile and there's a lot of discomfort involved.
Mm.
But everyone, it's a bit like autism. Everyone experiences it slightly differently. There's this
Yeah.
broad category of these are the sort of things it encompasses, but for each individual, it can be different. The collagen obviously affects our gut as well because collagen is part of every bit of us.
Yeah.
So my gut is incredibly unstable, which can make life very
Mm,
miserable. Makes it
mm.
difficult to absorb nutrients properly. So our body is under siege in that way, as well as from the difficulties of skin and joints and everything else.
Right.
It's one of those things that affects every bit of you, and that's, I suppose, why it goes undetected in so many people for so long. That
Sure.
doctors just aren't trained to join the dots and say, oh, this person's come with all these minor things over the last few years.
Mm, mm,
Gosh, I know what this adds up to. They just don't see it. Um, there's a sort of a little slogan that says, if you can't connect the issues, think connective tissues. And I'm
Interesting.
not quite sure who coined it, but it's great because that just sums it up. That if you're
Yeah.
struggling with all these weird things, it just might be Ehlers-Danlos.
Right, right. It's really interesting, isn't it? I'm quite fascinated by that. And you talk about this fragility, so this fragility of body. Do you feel there is a
Mm.
fragility to your heart, as in emotionally? Are you very sensitive? Because that's another area of our life, isn't it? This sensitivity that we carry. Do you
Yes,
connect to that?
yes, I think so. I feel physically and emotionally very
Mm,
fragile.
mm,
I think I spent so many decades masking very effectively that I hid that very well from people, and I also
mm,
hid it from myself.
mm,
Um, I didn't allow myself to experience a lot of emotion because I was taught as a small child, as I said, that emotion's rude, emotion's bad, you
yeah.
keep that hidden. Um, I think also I am one of the 50% or so of autistic people who also have alexithymia. This is thought to affect, I think, between 5 and 10% of the neurotypical population, but it's much more
Mm,
common
mm,
if you're neurodivergent. And it means that it's very tricky for us to determine what our own emotions are, to experience them and
mm,
to
mm.
express them. It's this sort of thing of being out of touch with what's happening internally.
Right.
And I think in some ways that has slightly helped me to keep safe almost and to press on in the world.
Mm,
But it is also, in a way, makes me feel quite sad because I think I missed out on so much positive stuff.
Of course.
And I
Yeah.
was also left puzzled by why inside I was so upset and so struggling over what would seem to others like small things, small slights, small difficulties, small misunderstandings
Mm.
have weighed so heavily on me. But
Mm.
now that I've read up a lot about autism, found out about alexithymia, again, it's about knowledge and understanding really helping,
Yeah. Yeah.
because now I think, okay, I get why.
Mm.
Like yesterday, I slipped coming down the stairs, and although I wasn't hurt, I just sat there crying because I
Yeah.
got a fright.
Oh,
And
yeah.
any small fright will generally make me cry. Like the our toaster often sets off the smoke detector in our house. And I know when it's going to happen because you can smell the toast getting just that little bit frazzled.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know logically that the next thing, any second now, that thing will start howling. You have to get a wooden spoon, stand on tiptoes and poke it, and it'll
Yeah.
stop and it's fine. And the house isn't going to burn down and it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But I will still squeal every time it happens. And
Mm.
if I am in a slightly shakier sort of place that day mentally, I will probably cry.
Right.
Every time I hear an ambulance outside, I have to struggle not to cry because I
Yeah.
think, oh, someone's
Yeah.
in difficulty.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I
Yeah.
am emotionally quite. It's like being an egg and having a very, very
Mm.
thin shell.
Oh, yeah. I
But I
relate to that.
understand it now,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's
It's good.
okay.
It's good to understand it, isn't it? Tell us what brought you to write your book. What do you think? What activated that in you?
I think it's part of the same story as to why I created my website,
Yes.
theautisticwoman.co.uk. Because when I realized that I was autistic, I wanted to go somewhere where I had this sort of one-stop shop where I could read something written by someone autistic, not by all these male so-called experts who write the research papers,
Yeah.
um, who are generally neurotypical. Um, and I didn't want something dry that was like a lot of the kind of slightly more academic books that are out there. I
Mm.
wanted something that came from an authentically autistic perspective, ideally female, because I understood that our experience of autism can be quite different to
Yeah.
men's. Um, and it was really difficult to find something that combined this aspect of a personal story so that
Mm.
I could identify with someone, understand their struggles and say, oh, I'm the same, I'm different. Those things that give you a feeling of validation and community and not being alone, but that
Mm.
also would give me lots of factual information that was unbiased, not all clouded by misogyny and misunderstanding and cliche.
Mm.
And I thought, well, I didn't really find that. So I maybe, because I'm a journalist and because I feel comfortable being open about my autism, and that's a very personal choice. And it's fine for those
Sure.
who don't want to do that,
Yeah.
because everyone must make their own choices and judgments about that. But
Yes.
I felt in a place where I could be open. So I thought, right, I'm going to do those things. I'm going to make that thing for other people. And that
Mm.
started off as the website. And then I thought, well, I can do more, maybe a book. Um, and I also wanted to write it from a sort of a selfish motive of if you write something down, it gives permission almost to look into it quite deeply.
Yeah.
And I wanted to look back on my life and try and resolve some of the things and understand things and say, why did that happen? Why did I feel that way? Why did that person behave that way? And I wanted to find out where my autism came from because
Mm.
as I said, it is largely genetic. And I was curious about my wider family, not in a way to say about to blame anyone. It's not about
Oh.
that, but it's just a human curiosity to know more of the
Mm.
stories because I love stories.
Yeah.
And so writing a book gave me permission to look into that, made it feel like it was okay then to spend time and energy on that because I was doing it not just for myself, but for a
Yeah.
bigger purpose. And I thought if I find those things interesting, and that's sort of almost a detective story of looking into my family's past, if that interests me, it might be interesting for others too. And it's maybe a way to help them understand themselves and provide information. I also thought that if I can write a book that is interesting and entertaining and might look just like an ordinary memoir and have a look like something that's got a bit of an interesting human story.
Mm,
Maybe neurotypical people will buy it, and maybe
mm,
I can sort of teach them about autism and spread the word
yeah,
that way, and maybe help get a bit more understanding and get people away from those myths. And if I can do that, and if I can do that by talking about the book more publicly,
mm,
then that feels worthwhile because it feels like, although I don't have a lot of energy to spare, it does feel like something I can do without too high a cost.
right. Yeah.
So it's worth doing.
What's your book called?
It's called Mother Tongue, um, partly because I feel like I've spent all these decades speaking a second language without a phrase book. Um,
Right.
so my mother tongue is autism, and that's what I now recognize, and I'm working my way back to speaking that, and that's lovely.
Nice. I like that.
It's also, the title reflects the idea of my mother teaching me her worldview and what I learned from her and that relationship we had. So it's about that as well.
Mm.
So it felt to me, it was a word that came to me right early on as I was writing the book, and I was like, yeah, that's what it's called. And I don't care what the publisher says. If they don't like the title, that's what it'll be. But luckily they did like it, so it was fine.
Fabulous. Wonderful. And where can people purchase your book?
It is available from bookshops. If it's not available from the bookshop that you frequent, it is available on Amazon. Obviously, not everyone wants to buy from Amazon, and
Mm.
that's absolutely fine. I'd much rather you bought it direct from my own website because I get only a tiny amount of money if it sells on Amazon. And it's actually
Yeah.
the website, my website sells the initial print run, which is a slightly nicer edition as well. The Amazon ones are a print on demand edition that's not quite such good
Mm.
paper. It's not quite so nice in
Mm.
your hands. Um, so if you come through my website, I can sell you the very lovely copies. I will package them up and send them to you. So it's theautisticwoman.co.uk. It's such a
Oh,
small publisher that they didn't even have room to store the copies. That's why I'm doing this myself, because the entire
yeah.
print run is stored downstairs in my husband's office because it's the only place we could find to put it. So that's why I've ended up doing the dispatching myself, and that's fine. I'm
Nice.
happy to do
Yes.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. Lovely. Beautiful. It's like having your own creative project, like your baby in a way, your little one sending it out into the world, isn't it? And it's got much more personal
Yes.
touch then, which is really lovely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's lovely having that access to the orders and being able to see who's buying it and
Yeah.
respond to them and chat with them
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
It's
I
just
like that.
an added little treat.
I like that with my own book. Yes, it's a really nice way to do it. So yeah, it's been wonderful to have this conversation with you, Alex. Really enjoyed it. Is there some last words you have for our listeners, those who might be experiencing similarities or wondering about their own diagnosis or having had a diagnosis and now wondering where to go with it? Is there anything you could share with them in particular? Some words of wisdom or encouragement.
Uh, Um, what I would say is, yeah, a diagnosis is not a bad thing. Being autistic is not negative, it's just a difference. And I think for a lot of us, it takes maybe a while for a diagnosis to sink in. There can be a lot of mixed emotions about it, a lot of sorrow
Mm,
about things, opportunities missed, and about the pain you've had to go through to get to this point. A lot of grief, and at times you may feel fraudulent. A lot of us have bouts of imposter syndrome.
mm,
But I think the important thing is to trust yourself, trust what you're feeling, um, and be kind to yourself. You're not broken, you're not failing, you don't need to be fixed. So just enjoy that, trust it.
beautiful. And what would you say to those who don't have autism or maybe the more neurotypical world? Is there any message you would have for them?
Hmm. Um, there are an awful lot of autistic people about, and we're not all one thing. We are all different.
Mm,
Um, and it would be just great if you, as someone neurotypical, was maybe to just spend a little while finding out a bit more about autism so that you can recognize us, help you to understand us, because it's really lovely if we can all get on. But when misunderstanding and myth gets in the way, it can make it really difficult. So yeah, it would be great if you can be our allies and be our support and friends in the world.
That's lovely. That's lovely. Thank you so much, Alex. It's been wonderful to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it.